Hello, welcome to Oceanic Oracle. My name is Ari and today we're wrapping up all the books that I read in June. Now, I know it's a bit late. I usually film these at the end of the month, so usually at the end of June, but as most people know, and if you're new to my channel, I am in the process of moving, so welcome back to the plain backdrop. In June, I took part in Whateverathon, which is a readathon that was created by Book Browsing Blog. It was great fun. The only issue was for me is that most of my time was spent packing. I really didn't read much in the last 2 weeks. In total, I read 12 books in June, which isn't too bad. Reading is like a stress reliever for me, but right now I just do not have the energy at all. I am going to be pulling up my general thoughts and feelings. I have my computer down here, so if you see me flicking my eyes down here, that's what I'm looking at. I'm actually going to be telling you my general feelings towards the books, what they sort of felt like when you read them, because I actually find that helpful for me. I know some people might not. Some books I have here in my shelves, like I have a few in my stacks. A few of them have already been packed in boxes, and once I'm finished with this video, it means I can finish packing probably the last box of books. Shall we get on with the actual books that I picked up? The first book that I picked up in June for Whateverathon was actually due to the fact that that Roland Garros was on. There are 4 major tennis tournaments throughout the year. They happen every single year. Roland Garros is the second, and Wimbledon has literally just finished, and I've been enjoying watching that. But because Roland Garros was on, I was in the mood to read something that took place in Paris, so I picked up The Paris Apartment. Now, my mum has actually taken this book back to the UK because she was reading it while she was here, and she hasn't finished it, so she took it back. So I'm waiting to hear what she thinks. It's a mystery thriller. If you're in the mood for sort of really good mystery thrillers, like where you don't see plot twists coming, granted, I am not a big mystery thriller reader, but Lucy Foley is like quickly becoming one of my favorite mystery thriller authors because her writing is so well thought out. I do not see anything coming in regards to any of her books. I gave The Paris Apartment 4.5 stars. It's a very tense and dark book, and the mystery follows throughout, or in all of Lucy Foley's books. All the books are told by multiple perspectives. You have multiple different characters, and all these characters are keeping secrets. So in this book, the main incident happens the night that a young reporter, Ben's half-sister, is actually coming to stay with him in Paris. And when she arrives in Paris and she arrives at his Paris apartment, he's missing. So she thinks, oh, he's just gone out, he'll come back in the morning, and he doesn't. And she starts to investigate what's going on because she's getting a very weird feeling about everyone in this apartment. It is fascinating. I did not see the twists and turns coming. I found it very dynamic. The story takes place in October, so if you're looking for something to read around Halloween time, I definitely think this book will be really great for that. It's very dark, and it was so intriguing. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to picking up what Lucy Foley creates next. So let's move on to the next book that I read in June, this one being To Sir Philip with Love. Now, this is a reread, and I've actually upped my rating for this book. I used to give it only 4 stars, now I've ranked it up to 4.5 stars. This is the 5th book in the Bridgerton series. This is a reread for me. This book follows Eloise, and it's Eloise's story. As I've mentioned, I've actually upped my rating from 4 to 4.5. Now, the reason that this happened is because I usually read this immediately after I finish reading Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is Penelope and Colin's story. Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is Penelope and Colin's story, it's my favourite of the Bridgerton books because I really relate to Penelope, and Penelope is sort of my self-insert character into the Bridgerton universe. Usually I read this immediately after I finish Penelope and Colin's story, And now that I actually had a break, and I can recognize that I actually tended to cloud, I would cloud my view of it. In my opinion, nothing could meet what Romancing Mr. Bridgerton did. I definitely needed to take a break to appreciate Eloise and Philip's story. With that break, I appreciate Eloise's story so much better. Eloise and Philip are they're actually really, really cute together. Philip is definitely more of an introverted person in the stories. I understood the story better given the little break that I had. It was emotional, but also it's so light-hearted. That's why I love reading romance, because I love reading light-hearted stories and stories that I know will be happy, because quite a few fantasy books don't have happy endings, and I definitely like the idea of having a happy ending at the end. I really do like their story. I needed time to appreciate the two of them, and I actually am really happy that I took the time to read this and enjoy this more, because I got so much more out of it and I really, really adored it. It's just a fantastic story. I think we really see the best in Eloise in her story, and I'm very excited to see when her story actually appears on TV. That's going to be very exciting. Anyway, I've ranted for ages, so let's move on to the next book. Alright, so the next book that I read in June was A Wizard of Earthsea. So this is the first book in the Earthsea Quartet, and this was for my classics card. I listened to this on audiobook as well as reading some of it, and it's definitely an interesting book. I gave it 3.5 stars. I actually do want to continue with the series to see my view on things. It's sort of one of the original classic fantasy series, similar to Lord of the Rings, but these ones are actually a lot shorter and a lot easier to go through. I did have to focus quite a bit more than I usually do with fantasy. I just wasn't in a fantasy mood, and I didn't really want to read fantasy at that time, so I sort of pushed myself through it. And it's fine. It was quite adventurous. The journey that Ged went on was really interesting. There's a school that he goes to, and then he slowly becomes the wizard that he's meant to be over time. I think the magic system is interesting. I think I need more time in this world to truly understand it more, because it was a bit difficult to get in the beginning, but once you understood it, I got it. I found it really slow. According to Storygraph, most people say it's medium paced. I found it really slow for a really short book, and it sort of took me a while to truly understand it. So 3.5 stars, not bad, but also not a new favourite. But I am going to continue with the series to see where Ged ends up going. So the next book that I read in June was Book Lovers. So this is a contemporary romance book, and I gave it 4.5 stars. I really love Emily Henry's writing. My favourite book that she has put out so far is actually You and Me on Vacation. I love that book, but I am partial to sort of friends to lovers. I really love the friends to lovers trope. Not to say that Book Lovers is bad. I really, really enjoyed it, because it gave me an insight into an industry where I don't have much knowledge of. So it focuses on the book publishing industry. It discusses editors as well as agents. The main characters in this book are a book agent and a book publisher, and it discusses the sort of rivalry with each other, with them trying to help authors, and I guess I really like the fact that this book sort of turns the girl comes to a small town, falls in love, and decides to stay here forever trope on its head, because our main character is definitely a busybody, and she loves working in the city. She does not see herself as falling in love with a small town, you know. She goes to this town in North Carolina, I believe. Her younger sister wants her to get out of her shell and sort of complete these lists, do things that she doesn't usually have time to do, because she never takes holidays, she never goes on breaks. It just turns into a really fun story, and I really enjoy the romance that went on in here, because like it's different from that trope. Our main male character is also very career driven. It's important to have those sort of stories. And while I didn't give this 5 stars, I loved it. I loved the characters. The atmosphere was interesting because, like, again, you sort of swap between New York City and this place in North Carolina. I just really, really enjoyed that atmosphere. It's more of a character-based book than a plot book. I mean, there is some plot, like obviously most books have plot, or they should have plot in it to make them enjoyable, but it's definitely a focus on the characters and their attitude. I didn't want to put the book down when I read it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. If you're looking for a romance book that is a bit different from what you may expect, I definitely recommend Book Lovers. The next book that I read in June was Stuck With You. This is the second book in the Steminist novellas series. So this was a novella which I really appreciated, because when I needed to read it, I needed something short. I gave this 4.5 stars. This book follows Sadie, who is a civil engineer, and she bumps into this big hunking Scandinavian guy who works in the same building as her. They bond over bad croissants and football, or like soccer if you're American. It's so cute. Because you can tell that this guy really, really likes Sadie. Like, the day they meet, they go back to his place and they have the best sex that she's ever had. Her words, the best sex she ever had. She bumps into him the next day and discovers that he's told people about some of her ideas that she shared with him. They work at 2 competing engineering firms, and they steal her idea. She's not very happy with him. It jumps between now and 3 weeks ago. There is definitely like misunderstanding in here. The main plot point and the reason it's called Stuck With You is they get stuck in a lift during a power outage where they actually have to deal with their problems, which is fun. I do enjoy that trope. So they get stuck in a lift, and they definitely have to sort themselves out. They realise where the misunderstanding happened, and they slowly resolve it, and it's a romance book, you get the gist. It is really cute, and I do like Sadie as a character. Like, I don't know much about civil engineering, and the way that the field was explained was really understandable. Also, the way that Sadie had to dress, I relate to that because, like, I'm a marine biologist. I work in STEM. The way that Sadie had to dress for that field to make men not see her as like an object, like, it's still highly prevalent. Most of the time when you take part in this sort of stuff, like when you're a part in these fields, men don't take you seriously unless you emulate the way they dress, unless you dress masculine. They won't take you seriously because of your femininity, which that's a problem in itself. Like, that is a problem that needs to be discussed. This book is really funny, it's very lighthearted, and like, it's very fast paced. It's not incredibly smutty. It's got one real smut scene in it. I definitely check out this series, it's fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. So there's that. The next book I read in June was Solitaire by Alice Oseman. I read this for ends in an even number. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I loved it. I actually picked this up because my sister told me that she had just finished it and she was raving about how it was her new favourite book and she wanted to talk to me about it. But I hadn't read it yet, so I was like, okay. She read it and she loved it, and because she loved it, I went and picked it up. I was not disappointed. So if you know Alice Oseman's books, like her novels are all contemporary LGBTQIA+ books. Some of them have romance, some of them don't. Obviously you don't need romance for it to be a contemporary book. This book follows Tori Spring, and if you know, Tori Spring is Charlie Spring's older sister. She's in the Heartstopper series. She's in the Heartstopper comics as well as the television show. This book follows her story. So this takes place during year 12, which is the second to last year of school. In this book, we follow incidences happening at Tori's school. She goes to Higgs, Like, these incidences are caused by Solitaire. Solitaire is this website that's exposing people and exposing things that are going wrong at the school, and things just keep getting worse and worse at the school due to things that Solitaire has been doing. Tori in the story is an unreliable narrator. This book is sort of a discussion on mental health for young adults, and it's really important that we have these books and we have access to these, because if someone feels similar, they can understand themselves better, which is really, really important. There are trigger warnings. Alice Oseman has written an author's note in the editions published in 2020. So if you are looking to read this book, but you might get triggered by certain mental health struggles, please read the trigger warnings before reading this book. It's a great book, but it's not worth triggering yourself. And if you know that there are certain triggers you have, please read those before you actually read the book. This book is quite dark and sad at times. It's quite emotional, and it just drew me in, it sucked me in, and I can't sing its praises enough. I think if you are looking for a book that'll hit you, definitely check out Solitaire. It was a great book. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's fantastic. The next book that I read was Radio Silence. I really enjoy Radio Silence. I read this for Ends in an Odd Number, and I gave this 5 stars. So this, I think, is my new favourite Alice Oseman novel. I do really love Loveless. I read Loveless last year, but Radio Silence is my new favourite. This book follows Frances, and Frances is a girl who's just entered year 13, so the last year of school. She's looking to apply to Cambridge, so she's looking to be she is head girl. She's looking to make a good impression on the University of Cambridge because she wants to go there to study English, and she's very, very hardworking. She's also bisexual, so there is LGBTQIA+ rep in this book as well. It's another contemporary book. It's not a romance book, which is something that people need to get. Contemporary does not always equal romance, and this book was fantastic. It was so emotional, and it was an incredibly reflective piece. There's this podcast that's online. It's called Universe City. It's a podcast which is which reaches tons and tons of people, and it's a science fiction podcast. The person who creates this podcast is called Radio Silence, and Frances gets approached to draw concept art for various episodes, and that's where the sort of relationship forms. And while that's happening online, Frances is also dealing with stuff in her actual personal life. So she's sort of trying to learn to live outside of just being focused on studies, because I think if there's one thing that people who go to the University of Cambridge or wherever get stereotyped as, they get stereotyped as people who study all the time. The way that they discuss how students deal with pressure, it raises so many questions, and I could really relate to Frances. I could relate to her a lot, given the aspects of her life, when I was at school, the standard oh yeah, you try to pretend that you're not obsessed with things, but then you really actually are. I definitely went through that. I related to her so much, and she's such a fantastic character. I just found her so interesting. It's fantastic. The writing is amazing. Characters are really in-depth. I really love reading about Alid. I love Alid's character. Also, demisexual rep. We are told that he identifies as demisexual, and I think it's really important that we have books with the range of sexualities shared, because it's so important for people to actually read and see themselves in books, see themselves as characters. It's one of the most important things. It's just so important to have representation in books, and I think Radio Silence and Alice Oseman's universe in general is just fantastic for that. So if you're looking for a contemporary book that does not contain romance but has lots of LGBTQIA+ representation in it, that has sort of a science fiction element to it as well, definitely check out Radio Silence. It's fantastic. I cannot recommend it more. It's top. Alright, the next book that I read in June was Sabriel by Gareth Nix. Now I gave this 4 stars. I read Sabriel for Forbidden Magic, which was to read any fantasy book. I liked it. I do want to continue the series. We follow a necromancer named Sabriel on her quest to try and find and save her father. They are both necromancers. It is a really interesting book. I like all the characters in it. I really love like Mogget, I should say. I really like Mogget. But then I also have sort of like, I have cats, and I think it's a very British, or it's a very British term to call cats mogs. Like I've got a mog on my bed. Mog is just a name for cats. Like I can literally remember childhood stories featuring Mog. Like there was a cat named Mog. I can't remember who wrote it. Whenever I saw Mog, I just thought of my 2 cats. I really enjoy Mogget, and I really liked what Mogget sort of represented. I also think the magic system was really, really interesting. I appreciate the addition of like a romantic subplot, but I didn't think it was needed. I think I needed the romance to sort of last a few more books. Like, I guess that's the one thing that about me that's in fantasy, I like having a sort of like friendship last longer in order to really get to know someone, because I still felt like I didn't know the male character who was the love interest in the end. But again, that's personal to me, and it didn't really impact the book. But it was a fun fantasy. Like I can see why people enjoy this world, and well, I might pick it up. I think if you like fantasy and if you like high fantasy, young adult high fantasy, I think you'll like this series. For me, I'm not really rushing out to pick up the next book, so there's that. Oh yes. The next book I read in June was The Last Olympian. So this is the final book in the Percy Jackson series. I read this for There Was Nothing, which is one of my red cards, which was to read a book classed as mythology, and this is technically like Greek myth retelling. To the surprise of no one, I gave this 5 stars. The Last Olympian, as I'm sure lots of people know in the Percy Jackson fandom, is by far one of the best finale books written. Like the way that I have the relationship with these characters, like them all crescendoing into this huge event. I was so emotional. I listened to this on audiobook and read it at the same time, because most of the time I was listening to this while I was packing. This book just, it has always had a hold on me, and I don't think it'll ever let itself go. Like it won't ever let me go, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't need it to let me go. There's just something about this ending that hits me differently than any other book endings really do. I think it's because my personal connection with the characters. Obviously I have bias because I have grown up, and I tend to reread these books every single year. Like without fail, I read them every single year, and I love them. Like they're a bit of my heart that won't ever really that won't ever relent. The final battle in this book is just so much more intense than other books that in the similar sphere. So dramatic, and like the crescendo and stuff that happens after the battle is just like, I just love it. It is fantastic, and I can't ask for a better ending. I will always be able to go back and enjoy them, at least from where I am now. Like I'm 24. I'm not exactly the target market for Rick Riordan books, but like Percy's attitude, his loyalty, and the way that he fights for his friends no matter what, the way that he just for me, he was such a, both Percy and Annabeth played different role models in my life. I feel like I actually tend to lean more towards Percy with his attitude towards things, and I like having people who are dyslexic and that sort of stuff, because yeah, it's me. But yes, writing fantastic in my opinion, but obviously that's just my opinion. I love the characters. The atmosphere that gets created both with the battles and afterwards in various locations. So on Mount Olympus versus New York City and like Manhattan Island as a like in general. Camp Half-Blood as well. The atmosphere is fantastic. This book is like a perfect mesh of like characters and plot. Like for me, it's the perfect balance. I didn't want to put it down, obviously. I never want to put these books down. I find that most of the characters made really logical decisions based on who they were, and my enjoyment factor is a 10 across the board. So yeah, there's that. I love it. Moving on. The next book that I read in June, or I listened to this one actually, Under the Whispering Door. This is so cute. I will preface this by saying there are trigger warnings in this book. I read this book for Out of This World, which is one of my yellow cards there. And there are trigger warnings to this. I will start by saying, author's note, this story explores life and love as well as loss and grief. There are discussions of death in different forms, quiet, unexpected, and death by unaliving yourself. Please read with care. So know that there are discussions of death in here. So it might not be a book for you if you struggle with stuff relating to that area, but if you're all right reading about these sort of things, this book is so beautiful. And this is definitely a character-driven romance. It's an LGBTQIA romance. It's a sort of like contemporary fantasy, which I really, really enjoy. And it's so beautiful. TJ Klune's writing was fantastic. I really loved like these characters, May, Hugo, and Wallace. Like Wallace was such an interesting character at the beginning, as you're supposed to. Like you see his journey and how he becomes, like how he changes. It's just beautiful. I gave it 5 stars. If you're sort of trying to get into fantasy, but you're more of a contemporary reader, definitely check out TJ Klune's books, because TJ Klune, his adult books, definitely fall on that, and it's just beautiful. Like this story is beautiful. The characters are stunning. You have the difference between life and death and the sort of atmosphere it creates versus like life versus death. Plot itself is much more like character based. It's all about Wallace sort of acknowledging his faults and learning to be better. I found that the characters sort of made logical decisions and it made sense to go in the direction they went in. I think if you're looking for a contemporary fantasy book, this is fantastic. Definitely check it out. Second to last book I read was Naughts and Crosses. I gave this 5 stars. It's a dystopian romance series. It is so impactful. Like the end, like it's so emotional. If you haven't read this series, go and read this series. It is like, I was crying. This book is a discussion on racism, fear, and mounting violence. And it's so important that we go and read about this sort of stuff, because there are definitely things that, like, based on who you are in society, you don't think about. Like, white people tend not to think about things unless they read about it. It is such an important discussion. You really, like, you need to check it out if you haven't. Like, you need to check it out. It is so impactful, and like, I can't sing this book's praises enough. I ended off this month with really good books. If you haven't read Naughts and Crosses, and if you like dystopian books, I think it's not a question of if you like dystopian books. I think it's a question of you need to read these regardless. You follow Sephi and Callum and their lives as Sephi is a cross and Callum is a naught, and it is a real discussion on racism. It's really emotional and it's really impactful, and I think it's brilliantly done. So definitely go, like, do yourself a favor and go and check this out. The last book that I read in June was The Children of Jocasta. I read this for And Then There Was Something card, which was to read a book about an ancient civilization. definitely fits. So this book discusses Jocasta and the lives of her children, mainly Ismene. We focus on the life of Jocasta and Ismene, so it is told in tandem. Every other chapter it swaps its perspectives. It starts in Ismene's point of view, and then it goes to Jocasta's point of view, and it goes back to Ismene, and you get told two different stories that sort of run parallel to each other. While I know the source materials, what I've read Oedipus Tyrannus as well as Antigone, and the two main characters, Antigone and Oedipus, are in these books. I really like the take that Natalie Haynes has on them, and just like, it's so interesting because it opens up a new conversation. I'm not a classicist, but I was fascinated by it, and I really enjoyed it. I listened to this on audiobook because I'm packing, and audiobooks are my best friend. This is so, it was so impactful, and I absolutely loved it. If you're into Greek myth, or even if you aren't into Greek myth, Natalie Haynes is a really fantastic author, and I feel like this is sort of like a gateway into a love in the future if you are looking to read an adult retelling of Greek myth or just Greek plays in general. It's so good. I think the characters were so well developed, and it gives Jocasta and it gives Ismene so much more depth. Both these women are exceedingly clever and smart. They understand the issues at heart. It makes me want to go and pick up the next Oedipus play, which I haven't actually read because I didn't know existed. So thanks for that. It's fantastic, and I think if you like Greek myth and you haven't checked out Natalie Haynes' books, definitely check out Children of Jocasta. Lots of people go straight to 1,000 Ships, which is her retelling of both the Iliad and the Odyssey in part, but definitely check out Children of Jocasta. I feel like this one's a bit slept on. It's fantastic. I gave it 4.5 stars. I loved it. And that brings us to the end of this video. So even though I didn't read as much as I thought I was going to, I still read a lot, and I had a fun time. That just makes it all the more worthwhile, so yes. So now I can actually pack my stuff, which is useful. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe if you want more bookish content. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, depending on when you're watching this. Stay safe, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!